I like this one.
In terms of notability, The Marvels was one of those MCU movies that just kind of came and went, and for that brief period of time, it wasn't seen in particularly high regard. It's not entirely hard to see why. I mean, considering the hit or miss state of the franchise in recent years, I think the last thing they needed popularity-wise was a sequel to a movie that wasn't even all that well liked when they were at their high point.
I have nothing to prove to you.
I'm just supposed to take your word for that.
It's because of that, and also the reviews that I had seen up until then, that I was essentially expecting another Quantumania.
You know what? It's probably fine.
But to be completely honest, I don't think it's as bad as people said it was. I'll admit it has some major problems, and when people say they don't like it, I can absolutely see why. Don't worry, I'm not completely mad. But when I compare it to some of the more bland and uninspired parts of the MCU over the last few years, and even the first Captain Marvel, well, I mean, the resemblance is still there, but hear me out. Okay, so first of all, and most importantly, consider supporting me on Patreon. For just $1.50 a month, you'll get access to all my videos before they come out, as well as a shout out at the end of every video. Okay, now first of all, I think it's worth getting out of the way arguably one of the main reasons people didn't like this film, the story. The plot involves Dar-Benn, the leader of the Kree, attempting to save her homeworld of Hala after Captain Marvel brought it to the brink of ruin due to turning against them in the first movie. She does this using one of the two quantum bands to steal essential resources from other planets for her own. The titular Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, gets wind of this and goes to stop her, along with the recently superpowered Captain Monica Rambeau, an old friend of Carol's who she's been out of touch with for quite a long time. They now have to put aside their own awkwardness to stop Dar-Benn, and there to help them is the owner of the other quantum band, Kamala Khan, aka Ms. Marvel.
Is this an Avengers test?
That's a perfectly fine premise. In fact, for Marvel, it's pretty standard stuff. So what ends up being wrong with it? Well, mainly what it comes down to is a lack of stakes and meaningful consequences. If you look at Dar-Benn, for example, there's a lot of potential that goes to waste. The film could use the different civilizations she's stealing from to create a large spanning sense of harm and destruction everywhere she goes, which could make her quite intimidating. But at the same time, she has a sympathetic motivation in that even though her plan is wrong, she's doing it to save her world and her people.
But I have found a way to return Hala to glory.
That raises a number of interesting questions, like who's more deserving of living in comfort? Is it justified to steal from others in order to survive? And if so, how much is morally acceptable to steal? On top of that, she has the potential to be a great opponent for Captain Marvel, since her goal of saving Hala is only an issue in the first place because of the harm that Captain Marvel did. That could make for a great moral conflict where Carol is trying to defeat a villain who's harming others, but in doing so, she's also preventing someone from undoing the harm that she herself has caused, amplifying the guilt that she's already feeling.
Annihilator!
I don't like that name.
This is all potentially interesting stuff, but the movie does almost nothing with it. Dar-Benn, despite having a theoretically complex motivation, is a very boring villain that not even the movie seems to be interested in. Take a look at how she's introduced. You'd think that for your big villainous threat, you'd want her introduction to have some decent build-up and some actually threatening presence. Like, you remember Infinity War? How they open with the destruction of the Asgardian refugee ship, murdered bodies covering the floor, Ebony Maw talking about how all of this is just the beginning?
The universal scales tipped toward balance because of your sacrifice.
All that building up to the first shot of Thanos, his back turned and his body draped in shadows, looking as menacing as his actions and as mysterious as his motivations. He then walks forward, one of the main characters already defeated in his hand, allowing us to put a face to all that slaughter, making both him and said slaughter all the more terrifying.
And now it's here. Or should I say, I am.
Then you have Dar-Benn, whose introduction consists of a couple of establishing shots, and then...
Yep, it's me, alright.
Not only is the direction in her reveal a lot less interesting, but she doesn't even really do anything particularly evil in this scene. She shows up, finds the quantum band, and then we cut to Kamala doing something completely unrelated. Infinity War's opening scene took its time, spending the first 10 minutes of the film making sure we know that Thanos is a force to be reckoned with. The Marvels just starts with the main villain digging a hole and implying, falsely, that she's gonna be a good villain later.
I assume you have a preference.
And nothing Dar-Benn does throughout the movie really helps to make her any more engaging. Any moral nuance the movie tries to give her doesn't mean much because not only does she spend most of her scenes maniacally sneering at Carol like a sadistic psychopath, but any signs that her people are suffering is practically non-existent. We're told that the Kree have almost zero resources, but all we actually get to witness is that they seem to be able to get by with what they have. If you want us to believe that they're actually struggling to the point where they're at significant risk, you need to show that. Show us that the population is sick, or in poverty, or dying, or any of the other million problems that could stem from resource shortages. Something to make us sympathize for this supposedly sympathetic character. It doesn't even feel like any of her actions have any tangible negative effect. Early on in the film, she attacks a colony of Skrulls. A lot of them end up dying, and the ones that manage to evacuate are left without a home.
We have nowhere to go.
But instead of this actually meaning anything going forward, Carol just calls up Valkyrie, who ships them neatly away, and they're never mentioned again for the entire rest of the movie.
Thank you again.
Always.
You know, I like a good Marvel cameo as much as the next guy, but I generally prefer the ones that are either funny or serve a thematic purpose. Not so much the ones there to do cleanup for the characters the writers no longer have a use for. By this point, you might be asking yourself, is this guy actually going to say why he likes this movie soon, or was this video just clickbait because he has nothing original to say? Well, first of all, rude. But secondly, even though the dramatic elements leave a lot to be desired, the movie can still be pretty fun. One of the most common complaints about the original Captain Marvel was that it was pretty generic MCU fodder with not a lot of its own unique identity to help it stand out. In the sequel though, it does feel like there's a genuine attempt to give it a bit of its own distinct flair. Instead of the pretty straightforward war story from the original, this one opts to be more of a comedy space adventure, with a lot more emphasis on character dynamics, creative sci-fi concepts, and an overall just more upbeat tone. The characters have some decent chemistry with each other, particularly whenever Kamala is on screen. Ms. Marvel was a show I had kind of mixed feelings about. I thought the first episode was great, but then the rest of it fizzled out to just okay, which was pretty disappointing. But if there was one high point, it was Kamala herself, who is just a delightfully adorable fangirl, and Iman Vellani does a great job playing her.
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Look at her opening scene, for example. We cut from the villains digging up an ancient artifact in space to the mundanity of Kamala studying in her room in Jersey City. It's a juxtaposition that conveys that out of all the characters, she lives the closest thing to a normal life. We hear her listening to the song Double Bubble Trouble by Sri Lankan rapper Maya, emphasizing that she's the youngest of all the characters and also establishes her South Asian roots, which is a major part of her identity. It is so hard to say the name Double Bubble Trouble and still try to sound like I'm making an intelligent point. This then transitions into an animated scene based on a fantasy that she's doodling in her notebook, of her teaming up with her hero, Captain Marvel.
What's your name? Miss Marvel? Dude. Twinsies.
That all helps to get across that she's very fun-loving and a bit of a daydreamer. And all that is told in a way that's really entertaining from both a storytelling and a visual perspective. Honestly, the fact that this scene comes directly after Dar-Benn's introduction is astounding, because every way that scene failed as an introduction, Ms. Marvel's introduction excels at. This scene also demonstrates why I don't buy the argument that this movie failed because you had to watch two separate TV shows to understand it. Even if you haven't seen Ms. Marvel or WandaVision, the movie still makes a point of introducing returning characters through scenes like this. Really, the only thing you might not know exactly is why they have powers, but even then, the movie does offer a TLDR explanation for it.
Where did you get that?
My grandma, she sent it to me in the mail.
So you can do that because you walked through a witch hex?
Yep.
It just doesn't go into full detail because it's not essential in order to understand the plot. And also, it's the Marvel universe. A character having powers really isn't that big of a pill to swallow. But anyway, even after that introduction, the character interactions are still pretty enjoyable throughout. For someone as obsessed with superheroes as Kamala, particularly Captain Marvel, having the chance for a team up is clearly very exciting for her, and it's really charming to see her take so much joy from something she only thought she'd ever get to fantasize about. But that gets balanced out by the fact that while Carol and Monica understandably find her a little overwhelming, they never come off as irritated or condescending towards her, which makes them a likable trio to watch work off each other.
Hi, I'm Carol Danvers.
I'm Kamala Khan.
It can also be pretty entertaining seeing them learning to work together. Due to an anomaly caused by Darben's quantum band, the three of them have become entangled, switching places with each other when they use their powers.
I could totally show you.
Although sometimes they don't switch, they don't really explain that, which is a little distracting, but it does make for some creative scenes. There's an action scene early on in the movie where Carol, Monica, and Kamala have to fight off a squad of Kree soldiers, with the three of them alternating between the Kree spaceship, Fury space station, and Kamala's living room. It makes for a pretty intense but also really funny action scene, with the three all separately fighting off bad guys while trying to figure out why they're warping, while forcing characters who don't normally interact to try to work together, like Kamala and Fury or Monica and Goose the Flurkin. Even the Khan family try to help as best they can, to varying degrees of success.
Kamala, are you okay?
And the fight itself is a good mix of superpowers and fight choreography, with an energetic song playing and some fast-paced cinematography to heighten everything. Then later on we get another fun scene of the three of them learning to control their powers. It isn't that deep of a scene, there isn't really much character development or anything, but it's still pretty fun to watch, and the characters play off each other really well.
Everyone together on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
Now why would you say go if you're going on 3?
I'm aware.
But while their interactions can be pretty fun at times, there isn't much in the way of a good story or character arcs to help tie it all together. The early scenes try to establish some tension between Carol and Monica for the fact that Carol wasn't there for Monica after her mother died.
There was people that needed me.
We needed you, Carol.
But there's never any drive for the two of them to hash it out, because it's not like they struggle to work together because of it. In fact, throughout most of the movie, the characters seem to be in reasonably good spirits around each other.
Captain Monica Rambeau, who from this point onwards will now be known as Professor Marvel.
Oh, Professor Marvel.
You can also see this in the interactions between Carol and Kamala. Early on in the movie, during the evacuation of the Skrull colony, Kamala is shocked when she sees Carol deliberately leave some of the population to die, which leads to Carol snapping at her in the heat of the moment.
No, how could Kamala now? We need to save who we can.
You would think that this would spark some debate between the two of them throughout the movie. Maybe Carol could defend her mindset that you can't always save everyone, which would conflict with Kamala's preconceived idealized version of her, leading her to start resenting Carol. But then, in the very next conversation they have, they immediately patch it up with no issues.
I'm really sorry for the way I spoke to you.
It's worth noting that this movie's runtime clocks in at about an hour and 45 minutes, which is a lot shorter than most superhero movies nowadays. This isn't inherently a good or bad thing. I'm personally not fussy about how long a movie should or shouldn't be as long as it feels justified. But my first time watching, I was a little concerned that the short runtime would be due to the movie not really having anything worthwhile. And while I wouldn't go quite that far, the plot does end up feeling a little hollow, and character conflicts just come and go without being properly fleshed out. And even though I like the happy-go-lucky tone the movie is going for, there are times where it can feel a bit style over substance. There's a section halfway through the movie where the main characters go to a planet where the inhabitants communicate only in song. I wouldn't have a problem with this, except it's not done for any deep thematic reason. It feels more like it was included because someone at Marvel just thought, I want a musical number. And then they just threw one in with little to no consideration of how it actually benefits the story. Going back to the action scenes though, even though I praised the first one, it kind of sets a high expectation that the rest of the fight scenes are never able to live up to. There's very few of them overall, and the rest are pretty standard and not all that interesting. There's a large-scale battle that takes place in the city of show tunes, and it's not bad per se, but there's nothing particularly engaging or unique about it. Then there's the fight against Darben near the end, which, to the film's credit, does have some good choreography. but even that gets undercut by the fact that the fight only lasts about 2 minutes. It's the big final battle, and instead of being big and exciting, the movie just seems to be eager to get it over with as quickly as possible. Even the resolution to the big overarching conflict between Captain Marvel and the Kree isn't very satisfying. The final part of Dar-Ben's plan for restoring Hala is to jumpstart the planet's sun by siphoning energy from the Earth's sun. And after the main characters defeat her, Monica realizes that Carol would be able to use her powers to reignite Hala's sun herself.
The reaction in your sun's core has slowed. It needs an incredible amount of energy to jumpstart it, and that's what you have, Carol.
So instead of the resolution coming from the characters developing to where they solve their problems in a way that they never would have thought of otherwise, the solution is instead something that Carol could have done at any time but just didn't think to until now. So I'm not going to pretend that this movie doesn't have major issues, and I can see why so many people didn't like it. But with that said, is it a good movie in spite of all that? If I'm being honest, probably not. The plot is underdeveloped, the characters barely have anything resembling arcs, and anything that could have made this an actually fleshed out story isn't given the attention it needs. Having said that, I won't deny that I still enjoyed it. Like I said, for as shallow as the movie can be, it's still got some pretty likable characters and a fair amount of creative stuff in it, to the point where I'm at least glad I saw it. I probably won't be watching it again anytime soon. I still think this franchise deserves better, and even in this era, it's shown that it's perfectly capable of better. But I also believe in taking successes where you can get them, so take that for what it's worth.